FHS Season Tickets.
Welcome into another episode of FHS Season Tickets. I'm Michael, and today we're going to be making our college football betting picks for the college football bowl season. And to do this, I brought in a guest. It's Lauren Joffee. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Lauren Joffee, and I'm excited to get talking about college football.
Yeah, so we're going to go through most of my picks. We might not be able to get through all of them, as I do have a good amount, like I always do. If you guys follow me on Twitter, you know that I've been making picks all year and have been doing pretty well, winning at about 58% against the spread and over-unders. So let's just start this off. And also, any games that Lauren wants to pick that I pass on, because I do not bet on every game. There are a lot of games that I do pass on, as there are just so many bowl games now. But I'm going to start off. First play that I'm going to make is Troy minus 5.5 against North Texas in the R&L Carriers New Orleans Bowl. I just think that Troy's a much better team than North Texas. They did really well this season in the Sun Belt, have been putting up a lot of points, getting a lot of blowout wins. Lauren, you agree with that pick, or what are your thoughts about that one?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And the line's definitely moving in Troy's favor. So clearly, I think they're the better team. I don't think there's any question.
All right, yeah. So we're gonna go one against the spread game, then one over/under game. So my over/under pick, my first one, is going to be Oregon versus Boise State over 59.5. Oregon's offense has been absolutely fantastic, averaging almost 50 points a game in their last 7. And I know they lost their head coach, Willie Taggart, but I still think their offense is going to be fine with their new star quarterback, Justin Herbert, who was hurt for a decent amount throughout the season. And then also I think Boise State will score enough to push this over the total of 59.5.
Yeah, that one to me, I'd probably even take that if it was in 60, 61. That to me just screams over. Of course, I say all these things, and I'm sure now I'm going to eat my words when it's not. But, yeah, both of those offenses, I think, have it in them to score a whole bunch of points, especially in this bowl game. I think that's a safe bet.
Yeah, bowl games are always difficult. I mean, betting on anything is going to be difficult. Like even the best players only win at like 60%. So it's just difficult to correctly predict the bowl games, as there's just so much variability in these games. My next pick, I actually made this a while ago, and I'm kind of having second thoughts because it's SMU minus 5 against Louisiana Tech. But after, obviously, Coach Chad Morris has left to go to Arkansas, it's going to be a little bit interesting to see how SMU does react after playing without their coach. But I still think they're able to cover this 5-point spread against Louisiana Tech. I think they're a much more talented team. I've been high on a lot of teams in the American Athletic Conference this year, so I think SMU gets the victory in this one by over a touchdown.
I mean, I don't know if this is a game that I would take. To be honest with you, any team that has a coaching change makes me nervous to take. Just because I try to get in the heads of the players. Like, are they going to want to play better to show up? You know, like, hey, I can't believe you left us for this, or are they going to not care? And I don't know. And I haven't watched either of these teams a whole lot. So I don't know that I'd be doing anything with this game, but that's just me.
Yeah, I had Louisiana Tech actually last week against UTSA. I think they were like 1-point favorites, and they ended up winning by over 2 touchdowns. So that was a good pick that I made there. So they were pretty impressive in the only game I watched them, but I think SMU's been pretty impressive. They kind of slowed down UCF's offense to 31 points, which is, I believe, the fewest points they might have scored all season, along with 31 against Navy that UCF had. So that was encouraging. They have 2 wide receivers who are fantastic, could be potentially like on the third team, an honorable mention for All-American. But the next pick that we're going to be making is Marshall under 58 against Colorado State. I think that this total is just way too high. I think that's going to be like a 28-24 type game, and I do not think that they get above the 58 points, even though Colorado State has a fairly explosive offense. What are your thoughts about that?
makes me nervous. Scoring, being able to score big numbers. I'm not really sure specifically why, but it's one of those teams that makes me nervous. Needless to say, I've been on Colorado State a couple times this season, and it's gone the opposite of what I thought. So probably again a game I'm not going to touch just because I don't trust my own readings on them, because clearly I've been wrong a lot of times.
I'm not sure if you remember this game, but I had Colorado State plus, I think, 5 or 5.5 against Boise State, and they were up 2 touchdowns with like a minute 40 to go, and Boise State scored, then got an onside kick, scored again, and then scored a touchdown in overtime, and ended up winning by 7 in just an all-time bad beat for me.
You know what? I have a feeling that is one of the games that I think I might have put them on my dead to me list. So that might be why. That game might be why. So,
a dead to me list. I like that.
Yeah, it's my dead to me list. Sadly, a lot of teams are on there.
Oh boy. So the next game we're going to be going into, UAB versus Ohio. The Blazers, first year back in the FBS after having their program taken away for a couple of seasons. I think they're going to cover the 7.5 total against Ohio. Ohio really fell off at the end of the season, having a bad loss to Akron, which allowed them to not make the MAC title game as Akron made it over them. And I think UAB getting over a touchdown down in the Bahamas, I think they're going to be more ready for the hot weather, and I think that could have a big impact on Ohio, and it might wear them out in the fourth quarter. So I think that UAB will cover. I'm even thinking about picking them straight up in this game.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good bet. You don't necessarily, for anyone that doesn't think that weather plays a role, it really does. Teams are just not used to playing in certain conditions, and it really takes a toll. And I don't know that. I mean, I know it's involved in when they make the numbers, I know that that's taken into consideration. But I really truly believe that weather really does play a much bigger role than it's given credit for in the numbers.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And next game we're going to be going into over-under, and this is going to be Toledo over 63 against Appalachian State. I think that Toledo overs have just been hitting a lot this season. They have an awesome offense. Logan Whiteside leads them. And Appalachian State used to be known for defensive prowess. Obviously, they almost beat Tennessee last season, but this season their defense has not been as good. They've been forced to be scoring a lot of points. I remember one game against Louisiana Monroe. I believe the final score was 52-45. I think we could see a similar type game, as Toledo has an explosive offense, and also Appalachian State, I believe, is going to keep it close, and the only way they do that is if they put some points on the board. So I've got Toledo versus Appalachian State over 63.
Yeah, I mean, that's a sort of high number. Obviously it could be higher, but I mean, I like that thinking that they probably they're gonna have to keep it close, and the only way to do that is a lot of points. So that to me sounds like a pretty good bet.
Yeah, and Toledo also has a high-paced offense. That's definitely something that you have to account for when looking at these over-unders, because I remember I had the under in, I believe it was the USF versus Temple game, and there was like 4 punts in 5 minutes, and then they scored to end the half, and it just killed me. I was like, we get 4 stops with less than 5 minutes to go in the half, and they still scored a touchdown, and I think I ended up losing that under by like 7 points, so that was kind of a rough loss to me. And speaking of South Florida, they're going to be my next pick, only laying 2.5 points against Texas Tech. I'm worried about this game because it seems almost too good to be true, and the public's also on South Florida, but I just can't see Texas Tech being able to slow down Quentin Flowers and this high-powered offense. And South Florida impressed me a lot, fighting back against UCF in a game that looked like it could have gotten out of hand early.
Yeah, for one thing, I can't root against Flowers. Like he's just, I just love his story so much. So it's very easy to root for him. But they never gave up. And I think that's important, especially, especially in a bowl game, because they're trying to prove something. They're trying to prove that they deserve to be a ranked team. They deserve to, they deserve to be up there. And I think that that's what they're gonna do with this bowl game. They're gonna use that opportunity.
Yeah, I find it ridiculous what the committee has done to South Florida. They lost one game to Houston, and they just acted like they didn't even exist anymore. Never had them in the top 25, despite the AP poll and coaches poll consistently keeping them in the top 25. And look at that. Speaking of Houston, they are actually our next pick here. It's going to be Houston versus Fresno State, the under 49 points. Fresno State has a very ugly offense, which was shown against Boise State for the two games that they did play, one the regular season and again the very next week in the Mountain West title game. And I took the over in the first game, and it just barely lost. Had a missed field goal, missed two-point conversion, and then also like a turnover near scoring range. So we lost the over by about 5-6 points there, so that was kind of frustrating. But I just think that this is going to be a low-scoring game. Houston has a better defense than a lot of people give them credit for, and also their offense has really taken a hit after the loss of Tom Herman and probably more importantly Greg Ward Jr. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, Fresno State, let's just talk about the fact that they were put into the top 25. At the end,
which was terrible. I have no idea how.
It's just garbage. I mean, it's so obvious why. It's infuriating almost as to why that happened. We all know why it happened, and I think that it's just they're not a top 25 team at all. Houston, they beat us. When I say us, I mean I Arizona.
Yeah.
So of course I have to think that Houston's gonna beat them because they beat us. Then again, there's we have our own problems, but I think that Fresno State is. I mean, I hate the word overrated, but I think Houston really does a number on them.
Yeah. I avoided this game against the spread. Just I don't know why I did, but I typically don't like making an against the spread bet and also an over/under bet in the same game. I believe I avoided that the whole time.
Good thinking.
Yeah, because it has to be like so exact margins when you have both an over/under pick and an against the spread pick, and you kind of start thinking about it, you're like, wow, I need this team to score this many points, or the other team, I need them to be under this total, and like. You kind of get rooting for two different things, so if you take, it's
Oh, that's right, you had
weird.
the under for this.
Yeah, I just had the under.
Oh, okay, all right, okay, yeah, no, I still, either way, I think that Fresno State is completely overrated. I don't see it being I don't see it necessarily being a close game, so I don't think anyone's going to have to keep fighting. So I don't see the score pushing high. I just don't see it.
And like you mentioned with Fresno State going into the top 25, I think that you do have to give a group of 5 teams a little bit of leeway in the standings, because then you would probably rarely ever see them. The only one you'd probably see all season would be Memphis and Central Florida being ranked, but Central Florida, they get the benefit of the doubt because their resume is more impressive than some other teams' resume, so you kind of just put them above. But Fresno State being ranked top 25, there are at least 40 teams, and that's probably a very generous number that are better than Fresno State this year.
Absolutely. No question.
It's kind of ridiculous that they were ranked in top 25. I'm sure Vegas had a good chuckle at that when they saw they were ranked. But the next game we're going to be going into is Duke versus Northern Illinois, and I'm going to take Northern Illinois against the spread. It started off only, I believe, a 2-point favorite for Duke, and it's already jumped out to 4.5, and I jumped on that with Northern Illinois. I think that they don't really get pushed around like I think a lot of smaller group of 5 schools would do against an ACC team, and Duke also has a limited passing offense, so I think that's going to play into Northern Illinois' hands. And also, I believe Duke got pushed around against Army when they played, and I kind of see Northern Illinois and Army as kind of similar opponents. I had Army against spread against Duke, so let's take Northern Illinois plus the 4.5, which is kind of a key number right there, that 4.5 total.
Yeah, I like Northern Illinois in this. I don't know that I necessarily. Duke is one of those. I feel like Duke is one of those schools that, the games that I think they're not going to show up, they show up, and then the games when they, the opposite. So I don't know with Duke. Teams like Duke and Kentucky have really messed with me this year. I haven't done great with either of those schools, so probably won't touch it. But I do like Northern Illinois. So.
All right. Well, now we're going to go into a school that I've had some trouble with, and that's actually your school, Arizona. I had them against the spread last week against Arizona State, which was obviously a loss, and they've killed me taking the under, and I'm going to do it again. I am taking.
They really drive me crazy. Now, I can make excuses for why we lost last week to ASU. I can tell you why I think that had we started at Khalil Tate from the beginning of the year, how this year would have ended up very differently. That being said, I'm not sure what goes through Rich Rodriguez's head when he makes some of these decisions. So it's a little nerve-wracking to. I mean, I won't bet on it just because I don't know. I mean, I'll say this much. Maybe it's the revenge game for what they did to us in basketball, but other than that, yeah, I don't know. I know how when it's with Pat games they go over a lot, but I don't know with Purdue if it's going to be the same thing. So it'll be an I don't know if I assume Khalil's going to play, but if he puts in Dawkins, then that's going to be at least 2 interception pick sixes. So
And those are
I don't know.
Those are the worst when you take the under when you have pick six. Purdue, obviously, they hired Jeff Brom, who a lot of people associate with having a high-powered offense, but I believe they haven't had a game this year. So the total in this game is 66.5. Purdue has not had a single game this year go over that total. The closest they got to was 65 points against Ohio.
Huh.
And the only other time they went over 60 points was against Louisville, and that was 63. So I like the under here. I think that while Jeff Brom is a very good coach, his offense was not as pretty as a lot of people made it out to be just because Purdue had a decent year, and you think offensive coach, you're like, oh, Purdue must have a good offense, but that's really not true. So I took the under in this game, even though I've gotten bit by Arizona unders, especially the Oregon State one. That was the worst one ever because it was like 28-0 at halftime, and the total was in the 70s, and I was like, we're good. And then Oregon State got 2 garbage time touchdowns, and it was just terrible.
Yeah, I think our defense just said whatever and kind of gave up. It makes me nervous. I think, and I have a theory on this. Like, I think that Pat schools, because I think they don't get a lot of attention nationally in comparison to a lot of the other schools, and I think partially that's because of TV and who gets to see them and the time. The games are late. Not everyone gets to see them, so they think they need to make up for it by scoring. By scoring a lot. Defense isn't as important to them. I mean, that's a theory. I don't know. How much.
The Pac-12 network sucks. Just straight up.
Don't even get me started. I routinely rail on the Pac-12 network. I despise them. I despise Larry Scott. I think he's the worst commissioner ever. I hate Pac-12 refs. That'll be another question. I don't know who's reffing this game, if it's going to be Pac-12 or Big Ten, but it'll depend. If it's Pac-12 refs, I don't know. I wish they're just terrible. I don't know. It just makes me angry. Pac-12 people.
I'm not sure if they are worse than SEC basketball refs.
I promise you. I promise you that Pac-12, both football and basketball, are the absolute.
No way they are worse than SEC basketball refs.
Yes,
There's
they are.
no possible way.
I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but they 100% absolutely are. They are. They are. Just they so are. It is so painful to watch a game with them. They love to be the center of attention. They're like their shining moment. I'm telling you, they are just horrible. I mean, we had a few years ago. One of the refs was giving incentives to refs that were calling fouls on Arizona. I mean, this actually happened. He actually was fired. I mean, that's just the kind of that's the atmosphere working as a Pac-12 ref. So that's all I'm gonna say. I'll be quiet now.
So our next game that we're going to be taking after that little kind of rant about college refs, it's okay. Sometimes you just got to get stuff off your chest about. We're going to be going with Boston College +3 against Iowa. I think that Iowa got very inflated after their huge victory over Ohio State. Took Purdue against spread against them. I'm going to be taking Boston College against the spread here, as Boston College has actually opened up their offense, which is kind of exciting to see. It's kind of bizarre. Their coach is Bob Diaco. Was that?
I like that. I think Iowa. Yeah, I think they kind of they had that great amazing win, and then they kind of just fizzled.
Yeah. Boston College's head coach Steve Adizio, he had like a famous quote after one of their games, like, you have to just wait till like we get it rolling. And after that, their offense like started putting up points. I believe it was after the loss to Wake Forest 34-10, and they had like a couple other bad games after that. But then 45 against Louisville, 41 against Virginia, 35 against Florida State, 42 against Syracuse, 39 against Connecticut. They are not the Boston College from the past couple of years that has had an inept offense. So I'm taking them.
No, but I mean, I even remember when they beat USC. I mean, that game kind of sticks out in my mind. I can't remember exactly when it was. I mean, I think it was last year. But they kind of came out of nowhere. But once they kind of started, they were off. I like that bet. I do. I like Boston College over Iowa.
All right, so the next game we're going to be going into is Wake over 64 against Texas A&M. Obviously, Texas A&M losing head coach Kevin Sumlin, and they have replaced him with Jimbo Fisher. Always interesting betting on these games, but I think bigger than the offense not being able to show up when a coach leaves is the defense not being able to show up after a coach leaves. And I already like this over, and especially if this game gets ugly, I think that Texas A&M's defense is going to be able to give up, and we could see Wake hitting 40 points in this game. And I think Texas A&M's offense is going to be able to almost keep up with Wake Forest, so I'm going to go with the over of 64 points in this one.
Yeah, that's not a bad bet at all.
It's a high number.
It is, but like you say, I mean, I kind of agree with you there. It's a lot harder for the defense to show up, for a number of reasons. But I just don't think it's worth it. They won't see it's worth it to them. They'll leave it on the offense to prove themselves. Not go out of it, not kill themselves to keep the score down. So, I mean, I do like that. Again, it's one of those that I'm nervous about it because the coaching situation. But your reasoning, behind is pretty good. So, I like that.
Next game we're going to be going into, you're going to enjoy this one because it's going against your rival, Arizona State.
I'm huge on this.
On NC State -6?
Yep.
Yeah, I love it. NC State is a very talented team. I said preseason they were one of the 15 most talented teams in the country. They were one of my two favorite unranked teams this season. Them, along with UCF, were my two favorite unranked teams preseason. And both of them lived up to expectations by getting into the final rankings of the college football playoff. So I was 2 for 2 on that. I love NC State this season, and I think that they are going to crush this 6 number.
I absolutely agree. Especially, I have no idea what's going on at ASU. I don't know. I mean, when your coach doesn't know who your mascot is, I don't know. To me, that's a sign.
Well, that's like a completely different story about them firing Todd Graham, which was kind of ridiculous, especially after beating his rival and winning 7 games.
Agreed.
But I think even if they just kept Todd Graham, I still think that North Carolina State is about a touchdown better than Arizona State before even
totally
factoring
agree.
in all of this. So I think NC State might be like the play of the season or of the bowl season.
I totally agree, and I too. I like NC State too. I've liked them. You're right. At the beginning of the year, they were just one of those teams. They put up a fight. I definitely, and of course, I have no respect for ASU whatsoever. So, the NC State is definitely one of the ones that I'm going big with, I think.
Next game, we're going to be taking under 51 between Kentucky and Northwestern. I don't like either of these teams, and I think when two overrated teams meet in a bowl game, it's safe to take the under, unless they obviously have like explosive offenses. So like if a Memphis, who maybe you think is overrated, maybe you don't. I don't think they're overrated, but if that was a team that you thought was overrated, you would take the over in that game. But I just hate both of these teams' offenses. It's just ugly to watch. So I'll be taking the under and be rejoicing after every punt.
Yeah, I don't. Northwestern, they're one of those teams that, like, there was so much hype for whatever reason, and I don't really know where it came from. Same with Kentucky, there was a lot of hype there too. But yeah, I wouldn't take Northwestern side on this. So if there was anything I was going to do, it would definitely be an over under on this. And I don't. A lot of punt sounds good to me for this. So that's some good thinking behind that one.
Yep. So next game we're going to be going into is Louisville versus Mississippi State, and I actually liked this before Dan Mullen left, but now after he left, I'm taking Louisville -6 points. Lamar Jackson, I believe, is the best player in college football. Probably not a hot take. I don't think he deserves to win the Heisman after his team struggled this year. I also love him in the NFL. When I heard Mel Kiper and Todd McShay say that they see him playing wide receiver in the NFL and Matt Miller claimed that he is a round 2 prospect, I just laughed in their face because it's like me, and then I'm not really involved in like quarterbacking Twitter, but I have a couple followers who are in quarterbacking Twitter, and I follow a lot of people in quarterbacking Twitter. So it's like Derek Klassen is one of the people who have been just praising Lamar Jackson. Also, Forverts and Justice Mosqueda, I think, is another one of those guys. They all do fantastic work, and they all completely agree with me. Actually, I think they kind of convinced me of Lamar Jackson being an NFL quarterback, but I'm completely sold on him as an NFL quarterback, and I think that Louisville just dropped so many points on this Mississippi State team. And after Nick Fitzgerald went down, I think that they're just not going to be able to keep up with this high-powered Louisville offense.
I totally agree. I think it sucks for Lamar what happened with Louisville. Just how that turned out. But I agree with you. I think he's a fantastic player. I don't know that he's definitely not Heisman worthy. At least I don't think so.
I would still vote him second, behind only Baker Mayfield.
I'm a little bit bitter about this year's Heisman. Khalil didn't get a nod. I think he should have. So I don't know. I'm a little bitter. It's hard for me to think without emotion with this. But I'm just being honest here. But I think Lamar, I think he's an excellent player, and I, in a lot of ways, really wish Louisville would have done better this year. So, he'd get more hype because I do like him.
Speaking of people potentially billed to win the Heisman at least preseason, Sam Darnold, JT Barrett, that's going to be our next game. And I'm taking the over in the Ohio State-USC game, which this is probably one of my least favorite picks I made, but I felt like I had to make a pick in the Cotton Bowl because it's 2 top 10 teams going at it. So this is definitely not one that I'm more confident about. Taking the over is 63.5. It's a pretty high number, but I think
Ohio State is 64 now. Or 64.5.
All right. I haven't checked the line since Monday afternoon, so some of them might be off by a couple points. That's when I made all of them. But I have Ohio State over 63.5 against USC. I think that Darnold's going to be able to score some points for USC, and also he's been turnover prone, and that's fantastic for overs, especially pick sixes. Those are the best. But yeah, I think that JT Barrett doesn't completely miss like 4 wide open receivers for touchdowns like he did against Wisconsin. I actually hated JT Barrett before it was cool to hate on JT Barrett. And I think the slander got a little bit out of control, but I was like leading the charge of that, and then like too many people got on that bandwagon. So it's kind of interesting how things kind of flip-flopped. But yeah, I'm just taking the over in this game, just going to enjoy. It kind of reminds me of the Rose Bowl matchup last year with USC, and that game was just so much fun. There were so many points, so let's just do it again.
Yeah, I mean, this game was, if anything, I would take USC and the points, and the only reason, or not USC and the points, but USC, USC plus 7.
Yeah.
Is because I made a big stink on Twitter about how I thought USC deserved to be ranked higher than Ohio State, and how they were the better team.
Which is insane. But go on.
Sorry?
Which is insane, but continue.
But, right. But so since I said that, I kind of feel like I need to back it up with that and take them. So I feel like I have to ride with that. It's a terrible reason to make a bet, but I feel like I'm going to have to ride with that.
I have had very interesting opinions on USC. I actually got into it a little bit with Ryan Abraham. He covers USC.
Yeah.
He's about 20,000 followers. He was saying how...
I think I saw that exchange, actually.
He thought that USC should be, like, ranked in top 4. And then he, like, made excuses for the Pac-12 commissioner. And I'm like, I see your point about how your commissioner sucks, but that does not mean that that loss to Washington State didn't happen. And USC's best win is twice against Stanford, who's a 4-loss team. They lost 2 teams in top 15. They have no other top 25 victories. So I kind of found it ridiculous that ESPN tried billing them as a potential playoff team, along with Ohio State and Alabama for the 4th spot.
I saw the exchange, and I actually totally. I mean, I got into a heated, not so heated, but an exchange with people when I said, yeah, I like this idea of getting out of the Pac-12, which is what he had suggested.
I don't have a problem with that. I just had a problem with USC potentially being in the playoff this year.
I mean, all I'm saying is that they had a better strength of schedule.
But
they had more wins over, top 25 teams.
They only had 2. USC? Mm-hmm.
Are you sure about that?
Yeah, look at the final rankings of the college football playoff. Here, I'll pull up USC schedule right now. They had 2 wins over Stanford, and so their record against ranked opponents at the end of the year. So a win over Stanford, a loss to Washington State, a loss to Notre Dame, and another win over Stanford. Those were the only 4 games they played against ranked opponents.
Well.
See, the reason why USC schedule looks better than what I think it actually is, and it kind of works also in basketball with RPI, if you don't play teams that completely suck, it makes your strength schedule look a lot tougher than it actually is. This actually cost UCLA last year in basketball. They played like 3 or 4 teams who were in the 300s for RPI last year, and their strength of schedule just tanked because of it. If you just take away those games, their strength schedule was actually pretty tough and comparable. So USC plays teams like Texas, Western Michigan, and Cal, who don't suck, and Utah, teams like that, who don't suck, but they're not really top 25 worthy. So I really don't get impressed with those wins as much as maybe computer numbers will and strength schedule numbers will.
I mean, that's a fair assessment. And to be honest with you, because of the Pac-12, I just don't think the Pac-12 has been very good this year. I mean, I feel like they've been just disappointing for the most part. So it's hard for me to look at conference play and really be all that impressed with it. But USC is another one. There's emotion involved with me with that school. So, and I'm not great at getting rid of the emotion part of betting. I haven't quite figured that out totally yet. So I don't know. You make a good point though. I mean, I might reconsider taking USC. But I do like the over. I mean, I do like. I think both these teams are going to be out to prove that they deserve to be in it. Whether or not they did, I think they're both going to prove that they deserve to be there. So I definitely think that the over's the play.
Yeah, it's a high number, which does scare me. I actually was on USC hype train, not this season, but last season. After Sam Darnold became the starting quarterback, I rode with them. I bet on them almost every single week that Sam Darnold was starting once he became the starting quarterback. Picked them to upset Washington straight up. I believe the game was at Washington. And I was making the case for USC if they did make the Pac-12 title game over Colorado. Unfortunately, Colorado, I do believe, beat Utah on the final week of the regular season last year. I made the case that if USC beat Washington in the Pac-12 title game, that they had a very legitimate case to make the college football playoff despite having 3 losses, and that this was one of the best teams in the country at the time. So it's kind of interesting how last year I was so high on USC compared to the rest of people, and this year it kind of seems like I'm a hater, which I'm not. But
I can see. I definitely find myself wanting to make a case for them, and I'm not totally sure. I mean, I have to assume it's emotion. I know some of the guys on the staff there. I'm from LA. They're sort of like my second team in a lot of ways, so I can see why I do it, I guess. I'm just not sure how to separate that yet. So I guess that's my problem. But yeah, I'll take the over. Maybe I won't take USC.
Well, I mean, USC making the playoff has nothing to do with what I think that they might do against Ohio State. Like, they are a very talented football team.
I mean, who they really beat, though, is the more important question. And
that loss to Notre Dame looks worse and worse.
Like all amazing people, but you're kind of right when you just put it out like that. So
yeah. So let's move on after we talk to you about USC for like 10 minutes there.
Sorry.
Memphis takes on Iowa State, and I'm going to take Memphis -3. I have been against Iowa State for a lot of points this season. I think that man Campbell is a little bit overrated as head coach. His team, let me pull up their schedule. So Iowa State, I bet against them a couple times, and it did work out. Even though they had a good record overall against the spread, I remember that I had West Virginia against them and Oklahoma State against them, which worked out. I actually did bet on them last week, which did work out, as I had Iowa State +3, I think it was +3 against Kansas State, and that was a winner, despite Kansas State scoring a touchdown in the final seconds, which gave them a victory. Really bizarre game. But yeah, I'm going to take Memphis to get the victory here. They were very impressive in the AAC title game. And it kind of worries me because now I'm thinking that the public is going to be wanting to lay the points with Memphis, which always concerns me, but I'm still going to do it here.
The thing with Iowa State, they somehow became the sweetheart team of sorts this year. And everyone was sort of high on them. I'm not gonna lie, like I was too. I love to be I think Ohio State's gonna pull the upset. But when it comes down to it, I think Memphis is the much better team. So I can't really make a case for Iowa State here, other than to say they're the cool team to want to jump on that wagon. But that's not a very good reason. So. So I definitely like Memphis for this. I definitely like Memphis, especially with that. I mean, they lost the game to UCF, but man, was it close.
And it was exciting to watch.
That was a great game. So yeah, I definitely like Memphis here.
I actually got into an interesting exchange about Memphis with Taj Boyd because he was saying like how impressive it was that Memphis got this big upset against UCLA. And I was like, actually, Memphis was only about a 3-point underdog. They have a great offense. It really wasn't that surprising to me. And he was like, well, their recruiting rankings are really low. But then I made the point of Pac-12 team going to play a noon game in the Central Time Zone, which is always weird for their just body clocks. And I just said how it just wasn't as surprising as he was building it up, and like eventually he kind of agreed with me, saying that maybe Memphis was a little bit underrated.
Yeah, I mean, I think UCLA was overrated. So,
especially after they beat Texas A&M.
Yeah,
oh boy,
absolutely. I'm so not on the Rosen train. I'm just so not on that train. I have no idea what's going to happen with Chip now, but I definitely I think UCLA's overrated. Memphis definitely underrated.
All right, so let's go next game.
Yes.
Favorite game of the bowl season to sleep in, because it is Wisconsin versus Miami, and this game is going to be terrible, and we are taking the under because both of these teams suck.
I 100% agree. Miami was I have a lot of friends who are big Miami fans, and I felt real bad. Every week I felt like they were trying to convince me that they were this great team, and I'm like, I just don't see it. I just don't see it. I was super, super shocked at how high they got ranked. And I don't know if it was the whole turnover chain, hype train, I don't know what. But they had no chance against Clemson. And I had a lot of friends who went to that game. And they just, with their tail between their legs. So, and Wisconsin, the same thing. Like, they just played no one. I can't, neither of these schools are impressive to me at all.
Yeah, Miami unders have been a big play. Shout out to the Puncast with Robbie Calland, Tom Fornelli, and also Chip Pedersen. They're one of their 10 signature plays that have been hitting all season, so I'm taking that again. I actually thought this total would be lower. I saw 45.5, and I was like, wow, I'm surprised it's even that high. But next game, we're going to be going into Penn State -3 versus Washington. I think Penn State is just, they were really close to making the playoff, and not a lot of people have realized that. 1 point loss to Ohio State, 7-point loss to Michigan State in a game that had a huge delay. I think that this team is really talented.
Yeah, I think Penn State definitely. I in a lot of ways, not in a lot of ways, but I think they got shafted a little bit. I mean, I get it. You lose a game, that's what happens. But it was close. And Washington is another. I mean, again, I don't know if this is emotions or not, but I feel like they've gotten a lot of credit for things that I don't necessarily think they deserve. I think they're good, but I don't know that they're anywhere near Penn State.
All right, last pick before we get into the playoff picks against the spread. Going to be Auburn over 66 against UCF. UCF overs have been hitting all the time. They have the best offense in the country according to a lot of computer metrics, even after you account for strength schedule and stuff like that. I think that the 66 number is way too low. I guess the bookies are thinking that Auburn shuts them down, but only making Auburn like a 10-point favorite doesn't really suggest that. So.
Yeah, I don't know, but I get, but the over on this definitely is way more appealing.
No, I got burned by the under. I took the under last week of 85.5. I got early, and then it still lost because
that's crazy.
I feel like UCF's defense is so unbothered when they give up like a 50-yard touchdown. It's like, oh, our offense will get back, and I have the under, and I'm just like, can you guys just act like you care just a little bit that you gave up a 50-yard touchdown?
Yeah, but see, that's just the reason to never take the under. They just don't care. And I think if they rely on their offense, then, which I think they do, then the over's going to be the play.
Especially with Scott Frost gone, like this defense is just not going to care at all. So finally, we're getting into our playoff picks. First off, Clemson against Alabama. I'm going to take Clemson. I've kind of let Barrett Sallee convince me that Alabama is not as good as they have been. I was riding with him on Auburn all season and a little bit on Georgia, not as much. You'll see what I think about Georgia in our next pick. But, yeah, I said preseason that I wouldn't be surprised if Alabama missed the college football playoff. I thought that Auburn was a very serious contender, and I actually had Auburn straight up against Alabama. But I think that Clemson +1 or +2, whatever you can get it at, is a great bet here. I think they win straight up.
I agree. Alabama has this ability to look like they own the field and they're amazing, and then you kind of look at who they play, and it's just not as impressive. And I think it's just Nick Saban. You look at Nick, you're like, oh, Nick Saban, yeah, for sure he's making the playoffs. For sure he's gonna, But I absolutely would take Clemson in this. Clemson or nothing.
Yeah, Alabama, I think they deserve to be in the playoff this year, but I think if this is really any other year, that resume does not get into the playoff. And then final game, Georgia versus Oklahoma. I'm going to be taking Georgia. I had Georgia actually against Auburn, so I played Auburn right both of their big games. I had Auburn against the spread against Alabama, and then I had Georgia against the spread against Auburn there, so I got both of those games right. So I'm going to take Georgia against the spread here. I think that they are going to be more physical than Oklahoma, even though Oklahoma impressed me a lot against Ohio State, being able to compete with them up front and slowing down their offense. And I think that Baker Mayfield does have success against Georgia, but I think that Jake Fromm is really underrated, and a lot of people have mentioned how they don't think that Georgia has the passing offense to compete with a team like Oklahoma, and I think that's just false looking at the name of Georgia. I think that Jake Fromm can make all the throws. He just hasn't been asked to make all the throws so far when you have guys like Nick Chubb and Shoney Michel in the backfield. So I've taken the Bulldogs.
Oklahoma, for some reason, they're one of those, they're the school that I was like, wait, I forgot about them. For whatever reason, they just haven't been on my radar as one of the great schools. And I don't know if it's because, Stoops or what. It's just not one of the teams that I just don't know. They just don't impress me all that much. And Baker Mayfield, yeah, he's good. But I think Georgia is just better. They've definitely proved me I wasn't sold on them at the beginning of the year at all. But they've definitely proved themselves to me. So, I definitely like Georgia here.
All right, so that will wrap it up for this episode of FHS Season Tickets. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like and also subscribe to see more season ticket videos. You can follow Lauren on Twitter @TheSpinZone. Is that right?
That's right.
All right, so peace.